Hello everybody, welcome to week 12 of the class. We have 3 weeks left, so we're coming down the home stretch. One quick announcement before we start talking about class materials is that I posted your participation grades for weeks 6 through 10. If you didn't have a chance to participate in a particular discussion and you still want to, you can. If you will, email me and let me know that you've done it, and I will give you some credit. I won't give you full credit because it's late, but I will give you some credit, which will be better than what you currently have. Okay, so last week we were looking at Congress, right, and particularly the causes of gridlock within Congress. And I asked in the discussion question, what is gridlock? And most people said it's an inability to get things done. It's like the gears in a machine have essentially locked up, right? The grid locked up, not moving anywhere, which we view as a problem in our society because for a couple of reasons. One is that especially this generation, our culture now is a culture of instant gratification. So if there's something we want, we can go out and get it. We can get things done, right? So, and that goes along with the nature of a capitalist society, right? It's sort of the customer is always right. There's this flow of goods and services, and the person who's the consumer is gets what they want. So, we as consumers of the American political system feel like we should get what we want, right? But the problem is that's not the way that the framers of the Constitution designed the government to work, right? And we're going to explore some of the rationale behind that and some of the mechanisms that have been put into place to make sure that, and it's, probably a good thing, right? That just whatever you want or whatever any individual wants, they can't get it at on a whim because it would be chaos. Right? If you had all these different competing special interests, then it was much easier to pass laws through Congress. Then there's no telling what our society would look like. It probably would have ceased to function a long time ago. So perhaps there is some method to the founders' madness and to this notion of gridlock. Okay, so Congress, right? I guess if we're gonna talk about gridlock, especially in Congress. We should explore some of the structures, the leadership, the organization of Congress, things like that, because those do play an important role in gridlock, right? So, obviously, as you guys know, right, Congress is bicameral, 2 houses of Congress, and this is something that came out of the Constitutional Convention, where they had to compromise between the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan. The Virginia plan favored the large states, and the New Jersey plan favored the small states. So the Virginia plan is sort of represented in the House of Representatives, right? Because it's the number of representatives that each state has is based upon population. So the bigger states have more representation in the House of Representatives than the smaller states do. So that favors the larger states. The Senate is equal representation for all the different states. So there's 2 for each, equal representation, which sort of falls along the lines of the New Jersey plan, where everybody had sort of equal representation. So every 2 years, so when we think about Congress, we just talk about it as an institution, but in fact, every 2 years there's a new Congress, right? So Congress continually, there's always a new Congress. So in this January, because of the midterm elections that just happened, the 113th Congress will end and the 114th Congress will begin, right? Because every time, even if not everybody is replaced in Congress, if some of the members are replaced, a new Congress is convened. So in January, the 114th Congress will take effect. Now, thinking about gridlock, the 113th Congress was not particularly effective because during its 2-year tenure, approximately 10,000 bills were introduced into Congress. Around 200 passed. 200 became a law. So that's about a 2% rate. So that's certainly not very efficient, right? So, we should talk about like the steps that a bill has to take before it can become a law, which we'll talk about, demonstrate how difficult it is, right? So, uh, a bill can be introduced a bill has to be introduced by a congressperson, right? So the president can suggest a bill, even a citizen can suggest a bill, but it can only be introduced by a member of the House or the Senate. So it gets introduced by the House or the Senate, and traditionally what will happen is that the leader of that particular body will send it to a committee. So there's this old saying that Congress in session is Congress on exhibition, but Congress in committee is Congress at work. So the true work of Congress actually happens in committees, and more particularly happens in subcommittees, right? And one thing to say is that to be given leadership of a particular congressional committee, especially a standing committee, which are the ones that continue from Congress to Congress, like for instance in the House, there's the Ways and Means Committee, which primarily has to do with taxes. The people who are in charge of that, the committee chairs, wield incredible influence because they have the power to actually kill a bill themselves by not calling a particular hearing on that bill. So it gets referred to committee, and pretty much one of the first things that the committee is going to do is that they're going to refer it to another committee, a subcommittee that falls underneath the larger committees. The subcommittee will do research on the bill, see if it makes sense, and then they will start to conduct a trial. They'll bring in expert witnesses to testify for and against the bill, and then they'll decide whether they want the bill to move forward or not, and then they will mark it's called markup, which is where they will make adjustments to the bill, and then if everybody on the subcommittee agrees, they will send it up to the committee. And the committee kind of does the same thing. They have a markup phase as well where they can make changes in the bill, and they'll take a vote on it. If it passes, it goes to the floor of the House, or it goes to the floor of the Senate to debate it. Now, something to mention is that typically a bill will often be introduced at the same time in both the House and the Senate. So it's going through these procedures in both the House and the Senate at the same time. So hopefully they can reach some sort of agreement on it around the same time, so it can actually be, because in order for a bill to pass through Congress and get to the president, it has to be passed in both the House and the Senate, right? So they're both going through these procedures at the same time. If it's voted on in the positive by the House, it'll be sent to the Speaker of the House. It will be looked at by the Rules Committee to make sure that it meets the proper protocol for being submitted. And then if both the House and the Senate pass the bill, a joint conference will be called between the House and the Senate, because obviously it's going through all these different steps. There are all these different edits that are being made to the particular bill. So essentially what this joint conference will do is that it's where the House and the Senate get together and try to see if they can reconcile their two bills into one bill and make agreements on what the stipulations are going to be, and then they do a markup phase as well, and they try to come to agreement on what the final bill is going to look like, and then they send it. It gets sent up to the president after that, right? If it's agreed upon by both the House and the Senate, and then it goes to the president, and the president essentially has four options. The first option is that the president can sign the bill. If the president, it's the easiest thing. If the president signs the bill, it becomes a law, right? The president can veto the bill. Now, the important thing to remember is that even if the president vetoes the bill, two-thirds majority of the House and the Senate will override the president's veto, and it can still become a law. It's pretty rare for that to happen, because usually the president can get, essentially all the president needs is 34 votes in the Senate. If the president can garner 34 votes in the Senate, which they usually can, maybe for partisan reasons or whatever, the presidential veto will stick. The sort of third option that the president has is that the president can sit on the bill. He can choose neither. He can choose not to sign it, right? And there are two things that can happen with this. The first thing is that if the president holds on to the bill for 10 days and does not sign it, and Congress is still in session, then the bill is considered to be a law. Now, there are several reasons that the president may choose to take this option. Perhaps it's a bill that the president knows is, even if he vetoes it, it's going to be overridden, and it's a position that's not popular within his party, right? So he doesn't want to be seen as taking action to explicitly endorse this particular bill, although he knows that it's going to pass, right? So he just sits on it for 10 days. He knows that Congress will be in session, and the bill will become a law. Now, the other thing is the president can sit on it once again for 10 days. That's the time limit. Sit on it for 10 days, and if at the end of that 10 days Congress is no longer in session, then the bill is considered vetoed, and this is called a pocket veto. So you can see there are 10 steps that a bill has to take from being introduced to being signed by the president. And if at any of those particular stages, for whatever reason, the bill gets shelved by the committee chair, right? It doesn't make it through the markup phase in the subcommittee. It doesn't make it through the markup in the committee. It gets voted down on the floor of the House, the floor of the Senate. Even if they both agree to it, and the joint conference between the two houses can agree on a version of the bill, then it dies, right? So there are all these steps, and it's extremely difficult. It's an extremely difficult process to get a bill to pass through Congress. Now, there's this study that was done. We talked about it a bit in the beginning of the class about how people, I think there's a 6% approval rating of Congress, right? So it has an extremely low approval rating. But in fact, Congress is, a lot of these bills, these Congress people actually want to be passed, right? They're very passionate about these bills. Otherwise, they wouldn't invest all their time and energy into it. It's not that they don't want it to pass. It's simply that the system is designed in such a way as to make it much, much easier for a bill to fail and die than for a bill to pass. So, we're working in a system where gridlock is sort of the norm, right? It's not, and it's kind of what the framers of the Constitution wanted. And we'll talk about this, and you guys will be reading about this a little bit this week. That's why Hamilton argued for such an energetic executive, right? So somebody who could actually get things done. Because in times of crisis, after Pearl Harbor or 9/11 or Hurricane Katrina, things like that, we need to get things done, and gridlock is a bad thing. However, not in times of crisis. The framers chose to err on the side of stagnation versus progress, right? Or maybe stagnation is the wrong word, but let's say equilibrium, keeping things, homeostasis, keeping things at the status quo, right? Because there are all these passions, and passions change from generation to generation. Senators are coming from different states. They may have different state interests. So everybody has an angle. Everybody wants to pass something. But if the system is set up in such a way that it's easy for all that stuff to go through, then you're going to be left with chaos, right? So the founders recognized this, and they said, okay, we're going to put all these checks and balances in place. So along the way, if this thing appears not to match up with sort of everybody's interests, right? Because it's literally going through almost every person in the federal government outside of the Supreme Court. And if it does not meet their approval somewhere along the way, it falls off, right? So in fact, gridlock is a very democratic process, right? And it's a safeguard in a lot of ways. So yeah, it goes against our culture of instant gratification, but in fact, it's a pretty important thing. And so people have also suggested that the major cause of gridlock are the political parties. You hear this all the time, right? That it's the Republicans and the Democrats. They can't get together, and can't agree on anything, and they're sinking the country and all that. But in fact, imagine, so political parties are nowhere to be found in the Constitution, right? There's nowhere that it says that there has to be a majority and a minority party. That's something that's sort of evolved throughout the process. In the beginning there was no political party when George Washington was president, but the Federalist mentality had sort of won the day in the debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. But the Anti-Federalists rose up, right? And they rose up in the guise of the Democratic Republican Party. And they challenged James Madison, who was, one of the authors of the Federalist Papers, joined with his friend Thomas Jefferson, and they formed the Democratic Republican Party to oppose the strong national government that Madison had essentially put into place, but that Hamilton had taken to great extremes in sort of trying to institute the national bank and the financial policies that that Hamilton had put into place. So that's how political parties sort of evolved. The Federalist Party, after John Adams fell away, the Democratic and Republican parties stayed together for a while, but eventually it became the Republican Party, and the Republican Party largely rose up as sort of on an anti-slavery platform, and then the Democratic Party came along as well later. So, and for probably the past 150 years, those are the two parties we've had, the Democrats and the Republicans. And we're going to talk about parties in next week's video, so I don't want to go too in-depth to it. But there are a lot of advantages to having political parties. Imagine how hard it would be to get something to go through Congress or get anything done if there were no political parties, if everybody was just an independent entity. One of the great advantages of political parties is it allows people to form coalitions. And that's how you pass things, right, is by getting a majority of people together. And that's what political parties do. They sort of unite people on sort of a platform of policies that they believe, kind of goes along with their ideology. So the notion of political parties being sort of the chief obstacle to getting things done is probably misguided. Because in fact, it would be much harder to get things done if there were no political parties and there was no unity. It was sort of every person for themselves, right? You can imagine all the conflicting views that would be in place in that. So political parties are actually a pretty important mechanism that the American political body has sort of devised to try to overcome some of these checks and balances that have been put into place by the Constitution. So I'm not saying that congressmen are great individuals and they're trustworthy. I am saying that they probably don't deserve the bad rap that they get all the time, right? Because they are working with a stacked deck, I guess you could say. Okay. Oh yeah. So there was one other thing I wanted to mention is sort of the types of actions that are available to Congress. There's a great document. It's called "How Our Laws Are Made." That was published by the House and the Senate. If you want to know how the legislative process works, I think it's about a 100-page document. It's very in-depth, but literally, if you want to know how it works, read that document and you'll figure it out. Likewise, with all these subcommittee hearings and things like that, they're all public, right? Some of them, most of them are. Some of them are classified, right? But the majority of them are made public. And you don't have to go to Washington. You can just turn on your TV to C-SPAN, right? And a lot of times you can see some of these subcommittee meetings. But anyway, so the four types of legislation that they can do. The first is a bill, of course, which is the most common. This is the one that has to be introduced by a member of Congress, the one that eventually becomes a law. Now, the next three forms of legislative action that Congress can take are called resolutions. So there's a joint resolution, which essentially carries the same weight as a bill. Joint resolutions and bills are typically pretty similar. However, there are certain things that need to be done as a joint resolution. For example, a declaration of war is a type of joint resolution. So pretty similar. But it's essentially when the two houses come together and say, we're gonna do this, right? The third one is called a concurrent resolution, and concurrent resolution is both a joint. So I should say, a joint resolution and a bill require presidential signature. So they're both considered types of legislation. Concurrent resolution does not. Concurrent resolution is something that affects the internal affairs of both houses of Congress. So there's a clause written in the Constitution that says that when Congress is in session, they can't break for any more than 3 days without approval. So they have to make a concurrent resolution saying that we're going to be in recess for more than 3 days. Or if they want to call a special joint session, like for instance the State of the Union address, there's a concurrent resolution that can be made to allow both houses of Congress to meet together. And then the final one is just a simple resolution, and that just says that those are the resolutions that apply just to that particular body's operations. It's sort of like their internal affairs. So with the House, the Senate, they'll make both these resolutions concerning how they're going to operate, how their caucuses are going to be formed, things like that. So those are the major forms of action that are available to Congress. Okay, so that's obviously just scratching the surface of Congress. We could do an entire semester on the workings of Congress, but that's the down and dirty. And just remember that while gridlock does not necessarily seem to go along with our notion of the way things should work, gridlock is put in place for a reason. So this week we're going to be looking at some potential solutions to gridlock. How do we do this? And the two solutions we're going to be looking at is first, giving more power to the presidency through things like executive orders, declarations of war or waging war, and political parties, which I talked about a little bit already. But essentially that's it for this week. I'll post our discussion question on Wednesday morning. Happy Veterans Day to those who are veterans out there. Tomorrow's Veterans Day, so don't forget that. And have a great week. Your participation grades are up. If you have any questions on those, let me know.